Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. My name is David Gadsden, and I lead the nonprofit outreach team here at Esri as part of our nonprofit program. Our mission on the outreach team is to make sure that everyone working to make a difference with GIS has access to our technology. Today, we're presenting a Storytelling for a Cause, presented by Alan Carroll and Grayson Harris on the Esri Story Maps team. We'll start with a few introductions. Alan, would you mind?
Sure. Happy to be here. I'm Alan Carroll. I lead the Story Maps team here at Esri and have done so for the past 7.5 years. And before that, I was at National Geographic for 27 years, the last dozen or so as chief cartographer at National Geographic.
Hello, everyone. My name is Grayson Harris. I am a content producer on the Story Maps team. So that means I do quite a bit of background research, content production, such as graphic design and cartography, and actually assembling our own story maps.
Perfect, thank you. And this is a very special webcast in that every nonprofit organization can leverage story map technology to help convey the work they're doing in a new way. Not just maps alone, but all of the rich multimedia and content that you can bring together for a truly engaging experience. So we're extremely grateful to have Alan and Grayson with us. We'll cover just a few housekeeping items quickly. If you have questions as we go through the presentation, you'll see a questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. Please feel free to type in any questions as they come up. We'll be reviewing and going through as many of those as we can when we wrap up. If we don't get to your question during the webcast, then we'll follow up with you directly afterwards. You'll also see a brief survey pop up at the end of the webinar, and our hope is you could fill that out and just help give us some guidance so we can help improve this series for future presentations. With that, I'd like to just cover a few slides that kind of introduce the role of nonprofit organizations and how we work with them here at Esri. Alan, would you mind hitting the next slide? So Esri serves over 6,000 nonprofits through the nonprofit program, which we established in 2010. Now, you'll see just a few of the more iconic names on this slide that reflect some of the more formal partnerships across that nonprofit and civil society sector. Now, any nonprofit, any 501c3 in the US, any nonprofit around the world that's working on conservation, humanitarian or community services work is eligible for this program. Through the program, we make our technology very accessible at a very low price point. And we really, in any case possible, we try to work with these organizations to help advance their use of the ArcGIS platform to both make their work more efficient, better understand and plan for where they're working, and as we'll cover today, tell rich and compelling stories that are enriched by geography about that work. Next slide, Ellen. So the way that you get started if you're not already involved is through the Esri Nonprofit program. That link you'll see is esri.com/nonprofit, or if you're on Esri's main website, in the lower right-hand corner of the page, you'll always see a link to the nonprofit program. There's a very short application. Our team will get in touch with you to confirm the kind of work you're doing, and you'll be underway from there. Now, this program, again, as I mentioned, only started in 2010, and we already have 6,000 organizations around the world that are really leveraging this technology for significant impact. This webcast series is intended to help you get oriented as to how you can leverage those tools to get underway and leverage this powerful technology. And again, we're extremely grateful to have Alan and Grayson with us. So with that, I'll pass things over to Alan.
Great, thanks so much, David. Let me get out of the PowerPoint. I have forsaken PowerPoint because story maps are, of course, inevitably the way I present story maps. So bear with me as I click through this story map series that will explain the basics of story maps and outline our various apps or user experiences that enable you to tell stories that combine interactive maps and multimedia content. I've been, of course, back in my National Geographic days telling stories with maps, mainly in old media, and it's been incredibly exciting to be at Esri and have the power of ArcGIS and the reach of the user community to enable us to experiment and create these apps that are now allowing hundreds and hundreds of organizations to tell their own stories. And there's nothing more gratifying for us than to see how nonprofits are using story maps to tell stories that are related to important causes, and that hopefully, and I'll show you a couple of examples of this, point people toward taking action in defense of natural systems or social justice or humanitarian affairs, or you name it. So let me just march on through this series. First, what is a story map? It's pretty simple. They are web applications that Esri produces and maintains and continually updates to that combine interactive maps hosted on Esri's ArcGIS online resource with multimedia content, so your photos, videos, audio, etc., and text to tell all sorts of stories about the world. And by world, I mean everything from a neighborhood to the whole planet, and occasionally other planets, but mostly Earthbound. Our stories are responsive, so they work on a variety of screen sizes, mobile, tablet, PCs. And most important to me, because I am not a technical person, I am not a web developer, they incorporate interactive builders, and Grace is going to show you a couple of examples of this in a few minutes. So these builders allow you to put together quite sophisticated multimedia narratives without requiring really any technical skill. So basically, if you can do a PowerPoint, you can do a story map, and you too might soon be giving up PowerPoint in favor of story maps like I have. They're also hosted by Esri in the cloud by default, so that means you don't have to worry about hosting and maintaining your own servers, etc., although you can host them yourselves. And they're open source, so you can download and host the source code, and you can also customize it to your heart's content. Our builders allow some basic customizations, but if you want to do a lot more, you're welcome to, and if you have web development people you work with, you're welcome to host the apps yourselves. Story maps have been taking off. This has been incredibly exciting for us. So after a relatively modest start in 2012, suddenly we find ourselves well past the 500,000 mark, just about to hit 600,000 in terms of story maps hosted on ArcGIS Online. And there are many thousands more that we can't count because they're hosted on enterprise systems or behind firewalls, etc. But it's an exciting time. I think we can potentially add another 0 to these numbers, but it's pretty exciting just to know where we are now. So over this the 7 years or so we've been doing this, we've developed a series of apps that we think accommodate most forms of map-based storytelling. So the way we've done this is we've kind of experimented. We'd assign ourselves stories. We continue to produce our own stories, and that's been a nice model because it grounds us in reality. It gives us a way to test and prototype new ideas, and so what's developed is a half dozen or so apps that we think are quite versatile and useful for telling your story. So perhaps our favorite, it's not the most popular yet, although it's gaining, is called Story Map Cascade. And we like it because it's maybe the most modern, maybe the most kind of immersive of our storytelling experiences. So here's an example by the Office of the UN High Commissioner on Refugees about the Rohingya refugee emergency and the mapping and profiling a huge refugee camp that has sprung up in Bangladesh. Here's an overview of the camp. You'll notice that Cascade has two basic types of experiences within it. So one is what we call a narrative experience, where you do the standard kind of scrolling, but then we have these immersive sections, and you notice the image kind of snapped into place, and now instead of the whole screen scrolling, you see these floating captions that go by as the screen changes. And so this allows you to do all sorts of cool things with showing different layers of maps, transitioning from one photo to another, or using various combinations of multimedia content. So this is one we're very excited to see because, again, it's about an important cause and something that's currently a big issue for UNHCR, and this is an important way for them to raise public awareness about them. You'll notice that Cascade also has these bookmarks that allow people to essentially jump from section to section and potentially to link out to other resources. Another example of a cascade is from the National Audubon Society. They've got a new kind of citizen effort to monitor the impact of climate change on bird populations. So they've got a nice combination of photos, pictures of people, and this is something I feel is important. Maps can be a little kind of cold and dispassionate, but one of the cool things story maps can do is bring maps to life by adding this kind of rich multimedia content and personalizing these issues by showing people in the field, people on the ground, which I think is a really important part of effective storytelling. So this is a nice way that Audubon has chosen to help recruit citizens to a climate campaign. We've also worked recently with Krista Schleier, who's a photographer associated with the International League for Conservation Photographers. And she's done months and months of work in the Anacostia River watershed here in the DC area. And so she worked with us to assemble a series of story maps on the Anacostia. So we did a little customization to the Cascade to include a sort of index map that allows people to access each in this series of stories. I'm going to jump over here to the latest because one of the things that she's done a really nice job of, and I think is a really key part of storytelling and story maps, especially for nonprofits, is to end with a call to action. And that might be as simple as a big donate button, but in the case of the Anacostia, she's created this whole series of things. So you can share the Anacostia story, you can find stormwater solutions, you can reduce and reuse, and you can see this is a nice use of this immersive section capability to feature the different ways you can take action in support of cleaning up and improving the environment of the Anacostia River watershed. This is a nice example too of the really rich mix of multimedia content that that Cascade allows you to incorporate. So that's our Cascade app. I'm going to move on to Story Map Journal. This is our most popular app, and I think it's perhaps that way because it allows you to have a kind of scrolling side panel together with what we call the main stage, which is the rest of the story. So you can kind of do two things at once. So this is a story map journal by the Outdoor Alliance in response to the shrinkage of the national monuments that the Trump administration imposed on us recently. So as you scroll through a journal, as you scroll down through the side panel, each section of the narrative can be and is associated with an item in the rest of the screen or the main stage. And so as you can see, those might be maps, and they might be different layers of maps, or they might be images or videos or infographics, websites, even other story maps. So I'm showing you, of course, story maps embedded within a story map. Quite a few people do that. Well, the one caution about it is that that won't work so well on a mobile phone, but I know that I'm not going to be using this on my cell phone, so I've chosen to combine story maps within story maps. Another thing Journal does is, as I mentioned, each section is associated with an item on the main stage, but even within a section, you can incorporate what we call story actions. So in this case, they're turning on different layers of a map that show different recreational resources. But it can also link to entirely different items like their own website or somebody else's website showing a specific hike within one of the national monuments. Here's another example, Halo Trust, which does amazing work doing humanitarian demining operations, has featured and explained the kind of field work it does to clear mines in areas that were formerly war-torn, but still pose a big hazard from thousands of mines being still left out in the field. So it's a really detailed description using GIS, combining photos, videos, etc., to tell the story of how they go about these demining operations. Finally, here's the Southern Appalachian Highlands Coalition showing how they manage and talk about the history of the so-called grassy bulbs. So these can be from very specific local projects to nationwide or international sorts of initiatives. A related app to Journal is Story Map Series. So I've been showing you these stories within a Story Map series. So instead of a single scrolling narrative experience, you have a series of individual items. So here's one. We have 3 different layouts of series. So here's one done for a local kind of interconnected system of trails around a local town. So it does very nice, the simple work of sort of describing what this trail system is all about. So this is the tabbed layout for Story Map Series. And in this case, they're taking you from place to place around a single web map, but this could just as well have taken you from a web map to an image to a video, etc. Another layout of a series is the side accordion layout, and this is a pretty cool story telling the tale of an accidental spill of a whole bunch of these little filtered discs. So they decided to turn it into a kind of citizen science project and ask people to locate and inform them of where these discs were appearing in beaches around New England, but actually all the way across in southern UK as well, and have a way even for people to right here within the story to report your sighting of a disc. So if you find a disc on a beach, here's the place to go. Finally, there's the bulleted layout, and that's what I've been using. So here's a story my team and I produced on wetlands of the world. So I did this for 2 reasons. I'm a wetlands freak. I'm a birder, and of course there are lots of birds in wetlands. And I'm also an imagery freak, and a lot of people love to look at imagery. And of course, wetlands create these amazing patterns that are really fun and exciting to look at. So that's series. Next on the list is short list. So all the apps I've shown you so far primarily tell stories in a sort of sequential narrative form. The difference of short list is that it's a collection of points of interest, but is not intended to be looked at in any particular order. So here the Piedmont Environmental Council has profiled all their projects around the state of Virginia. And here's a summary map of all the projects, but they also sort them by different types. So here are habitat-related projects. So I can pan and zoom around the map. I can click on any map icon or on one of these thumbnails in the gallery and get lots of information on each one of the projects from the Piedmont Environmental Council. Another cool thing I can do is, as I pan and zoom around the map, the app kind of filters the projects to show just what's in the current map extent. So if I live in Washington and want to know, which I do, and I want to learn about nearby projects, I can just zoom into the map and I'm not distracted by other projects. As an author, of course, you can sort these points of interest into different categories. You can also create bookmarks that take you from place to place in the state or city or you name it. Here's another short list. It's one of my favorites. This is done by the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And they've got a wonderful program called Fridays on the Farm that they've tied to a social media campaign. Every Friday they publish a story map on a specific farm, usually a family farm that might be, and the story might emphasize or feature sustainable practices or various innovative things that farmers are doing around the world. Well, this short list works as an index to that whole series of story maps. So I can just pick something at random, see a little summary here, and if I want to learn more about it, I can just click on the link and that goes straight to their story map. And what they've done a really neat job of branding the stories. Obviously, it's all tied to a hashtag, so it's it's a Twitter and social media campaign. Each story begins with a nice cover page, a locator map, and then on into a very engaging, short, kind of punchy narrative with nice photographs of, again, of people on the ground doing cool things that really bring farm life to life and give people like myself, urban dwellers who might not think very much about the diversity of farm practices and farm life, just to kind of bring that to life. It's really, really neat stuff. So we're seeing more and more of this sort of thing, these series of story maps, which are exciting to us. Another one, our first app actually that we created is Story Map Tour, and it's back to a narrative kind of format. And it's a simple concept. It's essentially a series of geotagged photos or videos. We recently released a new layout for Map Tour. Because it's our first app, it was starting to feel a little dated. So we wanted to kind of update the look and feel. So we've got just a nice clean layout. Here's the Sustainable Harvest. Here, Sustainable Harvest International is featuring efforts in Belize. I won't try to pronounce the name of that town, but you get the idea that here they're featuring local efforts in a nice variety of photos and videos with brief descriptions. A lot of uses for tour include things like walking tours of campuses or historic districts, etc. But here here's one of the more traditional layouts for Map Tour. Here the National Park Service is highlighting the various animals that were discovered or documented on the Lewis and Clark expedition, which is now, of course, kind of preserved as part of the National Historic Trail System. We also, as I mentioned, we continue to produce our own stories and we prototype new user experiences. So this is another version of Map Tour that we may develop sometime in the future and make available in configurable form. But we thought it might be interesting to experiment with a kind of scroll-driven version of Map Tour. So this is the kind of experimentation we do. We also occasionally, we have limited ability for this, but we occasionally partner with organizations, especially nonprofits, to produce custom efforts. And so we partnered with the, what's it called, the Peace Tech Labs at the International Institute for Peace to document terrorist attacks around the world. And so you can filter a less happy topic, but you can filter by different terrorist group and go through day by day. In fact, now year by year, because we're now into the third year of documenting terrorist attacks. So this is the kind of special work we do on occasion. Before I turn it over to Grayson, I also wanted to talk a little bit about why it's important to tell stories, especially for nonprofits. And that is that, of course, storytelling is one of the most powerful ways that we convey information, and it's really a key to what makes us human. And storytelling can be a very effective means of persuading people and inspiring people and calling them to action. So Hannah Wilbur on our team did some research about storytelling and about how the web works and came up with some interesting stuff. So character-driven stories actually cause our brains to produce a neurochemical that makes us more cooperative and more, frankly, open to getting out our credit cards and joining a cause. So a 2013 study showed that individuals experiencing the effects of oxytocin, this neurotransmitter, donated to 50% more of the causes and gave 50% more money overall than those not exposed to it. So stories have a real kind of chemical impact to us. Story-driven content also raises, according to Stanford University, twice as much money as content driven purely by statistics. So storytelling is effective in a bunch of ways. especially when you combine and include within stories rich visuals. So people really respond to rich visuals and are 40% more likely to be shared than content without visuals. I'm going to skip through this. By the way, you can find these stories on our website, which I'll get to in a bit. Also, maps are really universally appealing. They're incredibly efficient purveyors of information. They also, a well-designed map is nice to look at and is visually appealing. And we also found that in our research that a 2016 study showed that readers spend an average of only 37 seconds interacting with a web page. But our own analytics show that story maps, people spend on average 5 minutes and 43 seconds. So this is an enormously long amount of time in internet time. And people might think that a narrative with a call to action at the end might be kind of bearing your lead and might be kind of scaring people away before they get to the, before you cut to the chase. But in fact, you're more likely to engage people and bring them to inspire them to action through a story that might be a bit longer than just a single, simple, direct appeal. I think Grayson's going to bring us to our website at the end, but just know that you can find all of this and much more at storymaps.arcgis.com. So hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end, but at this point I'm going to turn it over to Grayson. He's going to show you some of the builder functions.
Well, everyone, what I'm showing you here is the story maps at arcgis.com. This is our website. And this is where I'd recommend you go for all of your story map making needs. So if you're coming into this cold, the first thing you're going to want to do, if you aren't already, is to log into your ArcGIS Online account, which if I'm logged into our story maps team here already, but you do that with this login button. And there's a couple different ways that you can actually start building a story. Today I'm going to show you just the builders for Cascade and Map Journal. Those are the two layouts that Alan first showed you all. You can do it through our apps page here, which gives you a description of all the different apps, or the utility we have called My Stories, which is pretty much your one-stop shop for all of the story maps that you've created or will create. Under My Stories, you're going to go to Create a Story, and if you know the layout that you want to use, you can jump right into it here. We also have a series of questions that can lead you through helping you decide which story map layout is best for the type of story you want to tell. I already know that I'm going to start by showing you a cascade, so by clicking on that little icon, I am dropped into a completely fresh builder. So if you recall, we looked at some of the other story maps that had a scrolling experience, and this is a blank one, so there's no content in here yet. We did a collaboration with the UN World Food Program, in addition to CRS and World Vision, last summer actually, on this story called The Front Lines of Famine, and it was looking at the quartet of borderline food crises in Yemen and Africa. So Yemen, Somalia, South Sudan, and Nigeria. And this is using the Cascade app, and we're combining a variety of videos, text, underscoring the nature of the crisis at a high level, locating where these events are happening, pulling up some high-level statistics on just the sheer scope and intensity of the problem, and then actually walking through some different elements that are contributing to the layout of what's going on, from conflict to climate issues such as drought, to a variety of different elements. And so I'm going to pull out some of the content that we used for this story to actually show you that this is quite easy to assemble, and I hope that you'll find it useful in your own work as well. Once I open this cascade that I showed you a minute ago, you're going to start by giving yourself a title and saving it, and that way you'll be able to return to your story later and also add content as you move along. The Cascade Builder is more or less a drag and drop experience for the most part. And most of these additions work by using the media picker. So this is this top part here is our title page, and it's going to bring you into this media picker that you'll see repeated throughout the Cascade Builder. So once you get familiar with this, you'll be pretty much familiar with adding media anywhere in the story. And it allows you to bring in content from a variety of sources, the easiest of which is simply to drag and drop photos from your computer right here. You can have a folder open, drag it in. In this case, since I'm working online, I'm going to go ahead and use some image links from our box folder here. So basically the way I would do this is take an image from my computer, drag it here, and it'll populate that image automatically and upload it to my Cascade. Now, as I move down, I can start to add different components. So this is where Alan talked about we have two main types of, we might say, sections in a Cascade. You have your narrative section where the text is fixed in place in the background, and we also have immersive sections. So I'll start by just adding more text in the narrative section. So I'm going to pull in some text from our other story here that we used. You can also type directly into the Cascade. And you see it starting to populate. Now, all of this is completely editable. And here I want to start pointing out how you actually begin to style and give your story its own look. There's a few different options here within text. You have this little paragraph symbol, which brings up your high-level types of styling. Header 1, header 2, pull quotes, and how your text is aligned. I'm going to turn this into a pull quote, which gives it a little more emphasis. The other options I have are when I highlight a piece of text, this toolbar appears where I can provide styling such as bold, italics, underline. I can also link out, hyperlink to a website, and I can also do things like change the text color. In addition to the immersive and narrative or text sections, we can also start to break up the story into different sections in terms of chapters, such as title. This title unit helps for bookmarking, which I'll show you towards the end of this particular demo. And in addition to being a holder for more text, you can also add images to that background. And I'll show you a different type. I showed you earlier dragging and dropping an image to add it to a story. In this case, I'm going to link out. So I can drag and drop images here. I can also bring in images from Flickr, Google+, or Unsplash, and I can link to content. In this case, I am linking to an image, and you can tell that by that the URL ends in .jpg. This could also be PNG or whatever format you're looking at. And that adds it in, and so this will load dynamically whenever the story map is loaded from that website. The other type of section I've talked about is the immersive section. So we've been doing text so far. This is what's called an immersive section. This is where you see the background media lock into place, and then I have text boxes that float up and down. Now, this gives me a few different options. So first of all, you'll notice that the organization for the overall cascade, which was here on the left, has now been complemented by this slide bar at the bottom. So this is giving you an ability to organize and add slides within this particular immersive section. So I'm going to go ahead and start to add some media into this. So far, I've shown you adding images by dragging and dropping and by linking. We can also do the same for videos as well. The only caveat with videos is they have to be already hosted online, preferably YouTube or Vimeo. In this case, let's pull in a video that we used on the front lines of famine. The way you do this is the same way that you link to an image link elsewhere in the internet. In this case, it's linking to Vimeo. I select that through link to content, add it, and then my video is added in the background, and by default within an immersive, it will autoplay as well without sound. As you see, we have these floating text boxes that overlay on top of whatever the background media is. And you have some of the same behavior that you see within those other narrative or text sections. You can select one of the headings, you can change the alignment, and when you highlight the text, you also have options for other styling, hyperlinking, and changing the color. The difference with the immersive section text box is you also have this pencil editor on the text box itself. This allows you to change the position of the text box, change the size, as well as change the overall theme, such as black with a white background, white with a black background, or even making the background transparent. This is just a single slide that I've shown you. I can also add additional slides and begin to stack them up. Perhaps I can add another image here, something that I used earlier. And notice that when I've added a different type of media from a video to an image, I now have a little transition icon here. When I click on that, I can change the interaction between these two pieces of media as the user is scrolling through. Currently, it is a fade transition. So it'll fade either quickly or slowly between those transitions. I can also choose a swipe effect. This is graphically appealing, but it can also be used to great use if you are comparing either two images or even two maps that have, say, two different layers of data upon that. So speaking of maps, I haven't actually yet added a map to this story. Maps can go equally within narrative sections or immersive sections, as you see here. And I do that the same way that I would add any other piece of media. In this case, I'm going to go to ArcGIS, and I can bring in maps that either already exist on ArcGIS Online, that exist within my organization, or are even maps that I've created under my own user. In this case, I'm just going to grab a random map that we already have in our online organization for simplicity's sake. And as that loads, my map populates. In the same way that I have transitions between images and video, I also have transitions to other maps. Now, once we get into maps, we also have another set of options available to us. This little pencil editor in the lower left of the screen is available on any type of media, where you can adjust the appearance, change to a new piece of media, and work with alternative media for mobile, which I'll get to in a second. In the case of maps, you also have some choices in terms of what you actually see on that map. So I can choose to activate any layers or deactivate any layers that are available in that map. Save it. I can also transition between different layers in the same map. So say I were to duplicate this slide by clicking the two pieces of paper in that corner. I now have two versions of the same map. But on that second map, I can go into Appearance and activate a different layer. And now what happens is I scroll in between, that data is presented to me as a side-by-side comparison. Within immersives, you also have the option to reorganize the work you've done by clicking these two arrows here. So say I wanted to move this series of maps to the beginning of my immersive, I can do that. And now my information has been reorganized. I can also continue to build my story, adding additional text sections, additional media. Media goes equally within these areas as well. Once I am fairly happy with my material, I always want to make sure I'm saving it, of course. And you also are always able to reorganize your work. I mentioned the sidebar on the left here. By clicking organize on that, I can move around any one of these sections and save them in that new order. For the overall look and feel of Cascade, you also have the option of adjusting some global settings. If you look at the top left corner of the Cascade Builder, we have a few options in addition to save. We have the sharing, whether you're going to share it, keep it private, share it within your organization, or make it public so that anybody can view the material. You have your health checker, which lets you know if there are any broken links or materials that are unavailable, say that will not perform well on a mobile device. We also have settings. Under settings, you can change the logo to your own logo for your organization, and as well as any taglines and links. Those bookmarks that Alan mentioned earlier, this is where you configure those. And these are tied to narrative and immersive sections in those title bars. So this is where I can select actually adding one of those bookmarks that will appear in the header. I can also change the appearance. Currently, we have a dark on light theme. You can switch this to a dark on light theme, as well as switch between a limited number of different fonts. Now with those settings in place, we can see the new theme. We also have the new font for body text. And as I mentioned, it's always important once you are ready to go live with your story, to be sure to share the story map itself, as well as any materials you're using in that story map. So this health checker is very helpful. You'll notice that alongside some of these different media items, you'll get a yellow or an orange bar. And this prompts you when certain materials within those maps are secured, if they're not shared publicly, if there's a layer that is, say, a proprietary layer that isn't available to the public, it'll let me know that that is there. And it also gives you an option to jump right into that map and either change those layers out or delete them entirely. I'll talk about that more momentarily. The other builder that I wanted to show you today was the map journal builder. So I'll work with some of the same content, and I'll get to the map journal builder the same way as I would the Cascade. Create a story. I can either get to it through the questions or select it directly. Even though the builder itself has a slightly different layout, a lot of the same principles apply. In this case, I have different options for how the sidebar and the main stage are positioned relative to one another. I also have additional choices for that once I've actually started the story. I'm not locked into this choice that I make here. As soon as I start a map journal, it's going to prompt me to add in a map to actually work with that material. This is a map that I created earlier just as a demo. I'm going to leave all these settings as default for now, but you'll see that you have a number of choices that you can make for how you present your map. I'm going to go ahead and leave that for as is for now. Click next, and then I'll be brought into a place where I can actually add in my text. Once I've added that, I have my first slide, which is essentially my home location. As I add additional slides using this Add Section button, these will begin to stack up on the left here as radio dots that I can then navigate to. And you can see here my map, which is fully interactive, allowing both setting up how I want my user to look at the map, as well as allowing the user to scroll and zoom around on their own if they so choose. I'm adding another section. And this is where I can begin to look at some of these other options I have. As a default, it's simply going to show the extent and the content that is saved in that map. But at this point, this is where I can really start leading my reader around my content and showing them what I want them to see. In this case, perhaps I want to focus in on the area around Somalia to show this is population density in the background, and these proportional symbols are conflict data from ACLED. I can also select what kind of content is visible. Maybe that this map is a little too busy, so I can turn off that population background and just focus on that ACLED data. I can also show any type of information in pop-ups and have those predefined as the user scrolls through. By clicking on a pop-up, save the pop-up, clicking next, and this is where I have my other text and media. I've shown you the text so far, but I can also add supplementary media into the sidebar itself. You've noticed probably that there's a number of text options here, from your basics to bold, italics, to changing the size of the text. You also have this Add Media button. Let's see if I still have a, and that appears here. Now, once I add that, I start to see my different slides accumulating here on the left. And as I navigate between those slides, this is where I get this animation effect of moving around, say, this particular map that I'm showing. I've got that pop-up there, already ready to go. And then the user, of course, now that they know that that pops up, can also explore the data independently if they so choose. One of the really strong use cases, or at least functionalities, of Map Journal is the ability to use what are called story actions. Alan demoed this earlier when he had active links in the text that allowed him to change the content. So far I've shown you that you can certainly have a map in the main stage. You can also do any sort of media that you like. And just as you would upload any other piece of media, you can upload it, you can get it through Flickr, you can link directly to it. And that media will appear in your main stage. And you can see me as I navigate between those sections. As I mentioned, we have story actions. So even within a section, I'm not tied just to this piece of media. Say I wanted to compare an image or another map with the map I showed previously. I'm going to create what's called a story action. And you can see here when I highlight a piece of text, and I have this level of tools called story actions where I can change the actual content of the main stage. There's also some options if it's a map to locate an address. I can scroll to a different part of this very story as well. I'm going to change the content and switch it back to the map I showed earlier. So now what happens is that button, or that piece of text, is now an active button. I can click on that and alternate between different types of media. Another thing I wanted to point out, which has been important for a number of our users, is this section here indicated as alternative text. We've added this in as part of 508 compliance. So this is actually making our story maps more accessible. And if your user base, if this is important to your user base, we definitely encourage you to use that as well. Similar to Cascade, we have the ability to set some global settings for the story map. Under settings here, you can change that initial layout that I picked at the beginning. I can make adjustments such as what side the floating bar appears on, as well as the size of that. Maybe I want to highlight more of the main media. Maybe I have a heavier text story and I want to forefront that. I can also change the general color scheme from white on black to black on white, adjust fonts, as well as add in my own logo, tagline, and link to my own website. I can apply those and you can see some of those changes take effect. Make sure I haven't forgotten anything here. Yeah. So on that note, I'm going to bring us back to our website. In all of this, I initially showed you the My Stories application. This is a fantastic place to keep track of your story maps. You can see them all listed here. But most useful, in my opinion, is the ability to check the health of your stories. Now, you can do this for all of the stories that are under your user by clicking here, or by expanding any one given story. You can look into the status of that story. So you see the type of content that is included in the story, maps, images, video. There's no issues found in this case, which means that all the content is accessible and shared publicly, as is the story map itself. Say if the story map was public, but this particular map was private, this would give me a warning, and it would also give me an option to fix it immediately. This is also where I can jump right in and begin editing my story again, preview the story, as well as get embed information if I wanted to embed this on my website, or even just share this link with a colleague or other users. Have I forgotten anything?
I think that's it.
Okay. Well, on that note, I'm going to hand it back to.
Actually, I've got just a couple of things to add. This is Alan again. One is that you can find some of these things on our website. So if you go to our gallery, we curate a gallery of several hundred story maps. Some of them produced by us, but many by our large and growing user community. It's really useful. You can filter by different apps, by different subject matter, even by whether a story is embedded or not. So you can get lots of inspiration here. But you can find, if you go here, you don't need to do this now, Grayson, but you can search on Introduction to Story Maps, and you'll see the story map series that I used for the demo this morning. There's also a story called Storytelling for a Cause, and that goes into more specifics about the kinds of ways you can use story maps if you're a nonprofit to reach and inspire and inform your audience. And then one other thing I wanted to mention is that you saw in Grace's demo that our builders vary a little bit from app to app, and that's because we've learned a lot as we've come along, and our builders have kind of evolved over time. And we're just about to launch into a major effort to kind of go back and do a major revamp to our apps. All the stories you're producing now will continue to work just fine, but sometime in the next month to a year, we're going to start to expose a new and unified builder experience that will allow you to create a story from scratch and actually be able to some extent, to jump from one's user experience to another without having to kind of, let's say you're halfway through building a story and you think, gee, this should have been a cascade instead of a journal. You'll have some ability to kind of switch horses in midstream. But more importantly, we're going to unify the builder experiences. We're going to make them even simpler and more intuitive, we think, than they are. We're going to improve the map making experience. So stay tuned for that. Again, it's probably a year off before we have much of this up and running, but it's going to be a busy and exciting year. And I think that's about it for now. We want to leave some time for questions, but we'll turn it back over to David at this point.
And I'll also go ahead and just leave you with the resources page on our website. As you explore story maps, you can find all sorts of resources here, from how-to tutorials to videos, frequently asked questions. And as you perhaps even get advanced with story maps, we also have blogs about all sorts of topics related to story maps, as well as for more advanced users, the Story Maps Developers Corner, where we share some of our getting under the hood tips and tricks, such as custom styling buttons, or adding other sorts of odds and ends that are not by default available in the builders. So definitely take advantage of that.
Perfect. Well, Alan, Grayson, thank you so much for the presentation. We do have quite a few questions which have come in, and since we've been focused technically, maybe we'll take a step back and first take the questions more along the lines of storytelling at a high level. So Alan, here's one for you. Jesse has a question of, are there special things to think about for designing a story map for children 9 to 11 years old?
Oh boy, that's a good one. Well, first, just remember that children are in some ways more sophisticated than we are. At least, you know, I'm in my 60s now, and I'm a digital immigrant, and children are digital natives. They have a natural affinity to this stuff because they've literally been kind of weaned on it. I wouldn't oversimplify too much, but of course brevity is good. Simple, bold graphics and images, keeping maps relatively simple is important, but I wouldn't think as dramatically differently reaching younger audiences as you might think. We have kids that's in grades maybe 4 and 5 even, that are actually building story maps. I encountered at last year's Esri user conference a 6-year-old who built a really pretty amazing story map journal. So don't underestimate the power of children, both as consumers of digital information and even as storytellers.
That's excellent. Thank you, Alan. And one more along similar lines from Jason. What's the purpose of the map journal? Journal implies writing the user's own experiences.
Journal can be used in a lot of different ways. In fact, when we first conceptualized it, we were calling it a geoblog. So we thought the main use was going to be as a kind of blogging tool. And in fact, in the builder is the ability to create, to essentially reverse the order of sections. So you could use it as a blog, but it turns out that probably less than 1% of our users are using it that way. So journal is intended to be very versatile. It can accommodate text that's quite long. It's not great for really short text, but anything from a paragraph or 2 per section to more than that is good. So it's really meant as a versatile narrative tool. We call it journal. It's just a name. It's just a label. It has many potential uses.
Thank you, Alan. So a technical question about Flickr and SmugMug. So Sonia asks, now that SmugMug has been acquired by Flickr and can host photos and videos, is there a source of content we should use, or is there any limitations, I'm adding to the question, or recommendations as to how to store and access photos and videos?
Yeah, I don't think we yet know what difference SmugMug is going to make to Flickr. We used to use Flickr a whole lot, but that was back before you could directly drag and drop images into a story. That was a huge kind of breakthrough for us. So back in the dark ages, 5 years ago, what we did mainly for images was we'd go onto our Flickr account and we would create a collection or album of photos that could then be accessed via URL by the story. You can still do that, and we occasionally still do it, but Flickr is less vital to the process of creating a story than it used to be, because now again you can you can drag and drop a photo from your hard drive directly into the story, and it is stored in those images are stored in ArcGIS Online as innate parts of the story. And part of that process, by the way, is similar to Flickr in that when you upload a photo to ArcGIS Online, it automatically creates several versions of that photo that are optimized for the size that they're likely to appear within the story.
And just to add on to that, while Flickr, Google+, Unsplash are directly linked in our builder, that doesn't mean you can't use photos from pretty much anywhere else. As long as it's publicly available and you can get what's called an image link, so that's the URL that has the dot and the file format, you can link to that image in a story map.
Excellent. Thank you both. So I'd like to respond to I'm sorry, Jody's question of what format do the maps need to be in. So everything you saw today is powered by Esri's cloud mapping platform, which is ArcGIS Online. Story maps are just one of the apps that once you map your data in ArcGIS Online, that you can move that data as what we call a web map into this whole suite of different types of apps that we make available. So through the nonprofit program, any individual working for a nonprofit can obtain ArcGIS Online for $100 a year. That's a subscription that allows you to take maybe data that you have in spreadsheets. Maybe you have spreadsheets with addresses in them or locations. You can literally drag and drop those onto the map, make that map very beautiful and compelling through some technology that we have called smart mapping. There are really a massive number of base maps and underlying data sets that are already stored in ArcGIS Online across Esri's vast user community. So you can really make a beautiful cartographic product, or again, a web map that represents your work. And that's just one of the ways that you can bring into a story map your work to reach an audience in potentially a new engaging way. So what we're seeing with nonprofits are not only story maps which are developed to represent project work or program focus areas that lead the viewer through this interactive experience to a donate button, but we're also seeing quarterly and annual reports published as story maps. And that's something I would encourage you all to think about, because putting a very rich, highly produced PDF is interesting, but making that content more interactive, where your executive support, your donors, potentially the foundations that are funding your work, can be sort of driven through more detail in the geography you're working in and the manner that you saw demonstrated today, that might be of greater impact than the approach you could be taking today. To Jesse's question, oh, I'm sorry, we did answer Jesse's question. There was a question about how to embed a story map within a website. And so maybe that's a good one for you, Grayson, or a web map into a website.
Yeah, let me start with just a couple of things. One is all our story maps are embeddable. Just a thing to be careful of is to make the embed window as large as possible, because our story maps because they're responsive. If the embed window is too narrow, the stories can kind of default to the mobile view, which isn't ideal for desktop view. But Grayson, maybe you can pick up on the rest.
Yeah, sure. So I hinted at how you get at the embed, and there's a couple places you can do it. So from my stories, okay, there we go. For any story, if you expand it, you get this embed link as long as it's shared publicly. And this is where you can configure how it's going to embed, small, medium, large, or your own custom dimensions. Here you have your actual iframe that you can copy and paste into the web page that you want to see it at. And you have a preview here. Because you can see I'm not a Mac user. Oops. you can see this the size here. So
let's do this one. Sorry about this. There we go.
There we go.
So now you can set even a custom width here, but I'll just use a standard one. You can preview your embed window to see how it looks. So it actually opens a sort of pseudo web page to give you a sense of how your story looks. Now this one is essentially the full width of the page, and it looks great. But a really narrow one, try this one. Try the small one. Might not look so good. So in this case, it has defaulted to the mobile view. So that's just something to watch out for.
And then
it still works, but it's not ideal.
Right. It's a lot of navigation all going on in one place.
But the key is that thing gives you that embed code that then you can use that, just copy and paste that code to the embed in your website.
The other place you get essentially that same set of options for embedding from within the builder itself. I'm not sure where it is in that series, but yeah. You're going to go to share in this case.
There you go.
And you either have just a link to the story, or you have your iframe right over here. Anyways, I think Grayson needs to get off the Mac.
Let's see, just a couple more questions. So Jason, story maps are not exclusive to nonprofits. They're just part of the ArcGIS platform, and so they're being extensively used across all of our user community. Yeah. Thank you, Grayson. And just to repeat, Alan, I do believe you mentioned how videos can be stored and managed to be brought into story maps. Would you mind repeating that?
So the way to do videos is essentially via YouTube or Vimeo. So you can you can upload and have YouTube and Vimeo host the videos, and then it's just simply a matter of copying the URL into the appropriate spot in the builder, and the video appears.
Okay, final question. And before we get to it, I do want to just let everyone know that we do have a webcast coming up. Esri is deeply involved in the UN standard for achieving sustainable development through the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. You'll see in the chat box there that on June 14th, we'll have a webcast on the use of our collaborative platform that we call the Hub, and its application towards working towards sustainable development. So we hope that you can join us on that. Now a tricky one. Final question: how could you develop a story map that could be used offline?
Well, the short answer is you can't really. However, the problem, of course, the challenge with story maps offline is that they involve this rich mix of multimedia content from many different sources. So it's a pretty daunting task to try to package up all that content and make it fully accessible in an offline mode. However, most of our story maps support printing or save as PDF, so you can at least have a sort of document form of a story map that you can access and use offline. That's one of the things on our wish list that we very much hope to get to. But again, our numbers are relatively small, and it's a pretty daunting development effort. But stay tuned; we'll get there sooner or later.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you all for joining, and I would encourage you to visit our webinar page as well, and to track us through Esri_nonprofit on social media. We'll also have a webcast on June 5th, which is a recap of our recent event in Geneva, GIS for a Sustainable World Conference. Thank you all for joining. On our webinar page, you'll also see the recording, and please share this with your peers, and feel free to reach out with any other questions. Alan, Grayson, Raquel behind the scenes, thank you all for your help in pulling this off, and thank you all for joining.